I'm Wenxing Zhou. I'm one of the many organizers of this celebration in honor of our beloved Professor Pat Berger. I want to thank, yes. I want to thank all of you for coming to this event, many of you especially from very far away, and I hope you will enjoy the two-day program as much as we all did have planning it together. And a celebration of Pat's career and mentorship inevitably draws together many people. And so I would like to especially extend a heartfelt thanks to our sponsors who made this gathering possible. They include the Center for Chinese Studies, the History of Art Department, the J.D. McEnvoy Chair, the Center for Buddhist Studies, the Institute of East Asian Studies, the Mongolia Initiative, the Townsend Center for the Humanities, and Julia White. Special thanks also go to Eleanor Living of the Center for Chinese Studies and Linda Fitzgerald from History of Art for their guidance and expert organization. The Center for Chinese Studies generously offered to throw this party for Pat in the first place. And Eleanor has shepherded the planning process from beginning to end, so a heartfelt thanks to her. And now, without further ado, I would like to invite Acting Chair Bonnie Wade and Professor Margareta Lovell, both of the History of Art, to come up to the podium to say a few words. Thank you.
Margareta's sitting right over there. She'll be right up. I, too, would like to say a very warm welcome. It is absolutely marvelous that the University of California, Berkeley has been graced with the presence of Patricia Berger all these years. She joined the faculty in 1997, so she's been here for a good long stint. But she brought with her very, very special experiences that even in these most recent years have been proving to be particularly pertinent for the History of Art department. That is, she was a curator at the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco. Yes. And still maintains very close ties with the Asian Art Museum. She spends time over there and enjoys it and is an advisor, so to speak, yes. I see in the audience today a number of people from East Asian Studies on the campus, faculty from the History of Art and other departments who have been people who have been closely associated with her, professors in Buddhist studies. I'm speaking just very short remarks about her around the campus, on the campus in general, and then Margareta, who has been in the department with her and knows that much better than I, as acting chair for only 2 years, can know it. Patricia has been important for placing a value, for emphasizing a value on art, on graphic evidence of thought in Buddhist religion, and making the history of art a cog in Buddhist studies on this campus. That is very, very important. One of the special things about UC Berkeley, some other universities, but nowhere near like it is here, is the amount of interdisciplinary interaction that there is, particularly in this case through organized research units, ORU, through the Institute for East Asian Studies, for example, which supports intellectual life across the campus. And she has been a very, very important person in the Institute for East Asian Arts for participating all over campus, and particularly taking her expertise in Chinese history of art along with her, for which the department thanks you. I would like to welcome also those who have come from afar to this occasion. We are honored that you have done this, and thank you for inspiring them to come. Patricia, I hope you have a wonderful symposium and you feel properly honored.
Good evening. I'm Margaret Lovell. I'm the professor of American art in the art history department, and definitely an outsider to these proceedings. So much so that I had to look up Dharma. I tried to figure out why we needed 10,000 of them. And so, of course, I did just what any scholar does. I went to Wikipedia. And that entry really isn't very good. So one of you has to take this on and get that right, because I'm still a little, let's just say, mystified. So we're here to celebrate Pat Berger's achievements in teaching, scholarship, and service at Berkeley. And I've been asked to reminisce for 3 minutes. So this is going to be a quick reminisce concerning this very last category, that is to say, Pat's service, particularly her service as chairperson of the Department of History of Art a decade ago. So, having watched no fewer than 13 department chairs at 6 institutions over my career, I can say with authority that Pat's leadership at Berkeley is about as close to utopic as you can get. So what are the earmarks of Pat's style of remarkable leadership? In brief, I would say invisibility, diligence, creativity, compassion, humor, and above all, a cool-headed display of good judgment. By invisibility, I mean not that we don't see her. What I mean is it's her capacity to herd cats without seeming to. She can elicit cooperative, creative, best thinking and problem solving and vision seeking, while giving every member of the community a sense that they have not only been heard, but that each is at the very core of a marvelous new consensus. Because she's a consensus builder, she is a community builder. By diligence, I note that Pat's willingness, particularly to follow rules, while at the same time learning the logic and the implications of those rules. She has a sixth sense for the longitude and latitude of institutional thinking on really any key subject. And she's been instrumental in keeping at bay the administration's suspicion that the History of Art department is a rogue department. By compassion, I point to her personal generosity. This is a generosity not only of expression, but also of action. When one of our emerita needed assistance coming to department events, shopping, attending appointments, Pat arranged her own life to very quietly see that these things were attended to. Throughout her years, wrangling matters large and small on behalf of the department, one always had the sense that Pat was motivated by a spirit of service, goodwill, commitment to fairness, and a profound optimism. That she's willing to resume this role next year is a cause for enormous optimism on the part of the department. We all know that in this profession, research creativity is honored over service creativity. But you will soon see in Pat's lecture in a few minutes that being a star in one dimension doesn't preclude stardom in all the others.
Now I'm going to introduce Pat from the perspective of her graduate students. It's an honor and a privilege this afternoon to introduce Professor Patricia Berger, doctoral advisor to me and many others in this room. We come together this weekend to celebrate and honor Pat, an extraordinary scholar and curator, a committed educator, and a gifted mentor. Pat's accomplishments in the study, teaching, and exhibition of Chinese and Inter-Asian art are as numerous and varied as her interests. Her work has spanned a formidable range of cultures and historical periods, from the Neolithic to the present, with many stops in between. Throughout, Pat has remained at the forefront of vital turns in the disciplines of art history, Buddhist studies, and East and Inter-Asian studies. After finishing her doctoral research at Berkeley, Pat taught at Oberlin College in the University of Southern California before joining the Asian Art Museum of San Francisco. During her long tenure as curator of Chinese art, Pat executed a complete redesign of the China galleries, and curated or co-curated exhibitions covering everything from late imperial porcelain to ink painting, embroidery, and tomb furnishings. 1995 saw the groundbreaking exhibition Mongolia, The Legacy of Chinggis Khan, co-curated with Therese Bartholomew. It received numerous prestigious grants, including those from the National Endowment for the Humanities and the National Endowment for the Arts. The catalog remains a model of scholarly excellence and collaboration. As we've just heard, Pat joined the Berkeley faculty in 1997. Her 2003 book, entitled Empire of Emptiness, Buddhist Art and Political Authority in Qing China, is one of the first monographic studies to take seriously the visual and material practices of Qing dynasty rulers, most notably the 18th century Emperor Qianlong. Combining the fresh perspective of New Qing history with deep engagement with Buddhist visual culture and methodological rigor, Empire of Emptiness signaled a profound shift in the field. Qing art, not too long ago discussed in terms of decadence and orthodoxy, is now a mainstay in the increasingly global terrain of early modern art history. Pat is among the few scholars in North America to put Chinese, Tibetan, and Mongolian art in dialogue, and remains an authority on the multicultural and polyglot dimensions of Qing visual culture. Empire of Emptiness was awarded the prestigious Shimada Prize from the Freer and Sackler Galleries of Art 5 years after its publication, a testament to its foresight. One thing Pat and I have connected on over the years is our background in studio arts. Pat earned a BFA in painting from Cornell University, and I think we can see an artist's sensibility carry through her holistic approach to art history. As a doctoral student here at Berkeley, Pat curated an exhibition at the Berkeley Art Museum on early imperial funerary art. She ingeniously mounted rubbings held by the East Asian Library on a three-dimensional model of the original stone shrine itself. Pat's fluid prose, peppered with wordplay and felicitous turns of phrase, evinces the joy she takes in the writer's craft, even when working through difficult historical, linguistic, and theoretical problems. Her authorial agility hints at an adventurous spirit matched in her research travels throughout Asia. Pat toured China as a graduate student in 1978 with one of the earliest US scholarly delegations of the post-Mao period. Later research has taken her to remote parts of China or Inner Asia, often in the company of husband Charlie, daughter Laura, or students. In 2005, Pat led a group through the Western Himalaya with visiting professor Christian Luxanitz, and in 2006 to Buddhist sites in northern China with history of art colleague Gregory Levine. Pat recalls even the earliest of these travels in exquisite detail. In the lecture hall, Pat's mastery and love of storytelling comes into full force, converting, so to speak, many an unsuspecting undergraduate to once seemingly arcane materials. I think her secret lies in an unusual combination of rigor, grace, and transparency, and not least of all, her capacious and empathetic approach to human expression. I've experienced firsthand many students take on big, indelible questions: what it means to live a good life, what happens to us in death, as Pat deftly guides them through the complexities of the material and visual world. Pat has supervised dissertations on a staggering range of topics, including script in early Chinese art, Korean painting, Mongolian architecture and urbanism, Tibetan Buddhism, and Jesuit arts and crafts workshops in Shanghai. Many represent fields rarely studied or taught in the North American Academy. Pat works ceaselessly to create and facilitate opportunities for her graduate students, strategizing ambitious or unorthodox research agendas, unlocking doors to collections around the world, supporting extra language study, and writing endless recommendation letters, of course. All the while, she leaves room for chance, spontaneity, and periods of gestation that allow our projects to transform and mature. Pat is a veteran team teacher, most recently implementing a multi-pronged curatorial training initiative with longtime department collaborator Margaretta Lovell. Made possible by a major grant from the Mellon Foundation, this initiative has created all sorts of new possibilities in the department, from object and materials-focused seminars to broaden professional horizons. Pat adds this to a repertoire of dynamic seminars, always thoughtfully conceived and typically enrolled well beyond area studies borders. Recent offerings have addressed ornament, human rights in China, visualizing cultures, beer, apparently, and the lives of Buddhist images. In 2016, Pat's mentoring and impact on the field were recognized with the Distinguished Teaching of Art History Award from the College Art Association, which is the discipline's highest teaching honor. Pat's expansive, scholarly, and pedagogical vision translates, as we have just heard, into an extraordinary record of leadership and institutional service. She served as chair of the History of the Art Department for 3.5 years and is now completing a term on the Budget Committee, which is one of the most important and demanding faculty service positions on campus. Meanwhile, Pat has contributed to the establishment of 2 new programs that dramatically expand and consolidate Berkeley's resources in Asian studies, the Mongolia Initiative, in collaboration with our senpai Ornat Soltam, and the Tang Center for Silk Road Studies, launched just 1 week ago. Through these endeavors, Pat invests in not just new knowledge, but entire fields, particularly young, threatened, or marginalized ones. Despite her students' range of specializations, I think we share a remarkably consistent sense of her ineffable gifts as a mentor. Pat clearly finds joy in our camaraderie, the seeds of which, of course, she plants herself. The exquisite sculpture selected as the image for this event represents Avalokiteshvara, a bodhisattva who, as the embodiment of compassion, swoops in just at the right moment to aid any sentient being in need. For years, a poster of this very sculpture hung on the door to Pat's office, offering a moment of reflection before entering for a meeting or a chat. It is no secret that Pat's students have long likened her to this figure, as she has shown seemingly limitless and undifferentiated compassion for each one of us. I think the comparison does not end with Pat's compassion, however. It also relates, as we come to learn, to the skill with which she advises us. From the seemingly casual comment impossibly tailored to your current situation or predicament, to the entire semester of focused, goal-oriented work. And we thank her for that. The title of this symposium, Return of 10,000 Dharmas, which was proposed by another senpai, William Ma, riffs on the themes of homecoming and fellowship. These themes have recurred throughout Pat's career, in which the wisdom of her own mentor, the late James Cahill, has never been far from her mind. The original source is a Qing court painting that commemorates in a very complex manner, as I believe Pat will soon discuss, the return, or put differently, submission, of the Torgut tribe to the Qing Empire in 1771. Today, we stage our own sort of return, the 10,000 signifying not just our quantity, but also our diversity, as we celebrate our beloved teacher. Please join me in welcoming Patricia Berger.
Oh, no. Thank you. Congratulations. Thank you. I should put them back on you so I don't get hot. Okay, now, Mickey, thank you so much for that lovely introduction, and to Bonnie and Margareta. It's just so heartwarming, I can't tell you. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to speak, actually. But my first task is actually to change the PowerPoint, so let's see if I can manage that. So my thanks to all of my students, colleagues, and all old friends who've collaborated, I think, in secret for months, to the point where I don't even know what time dinner is this evening, by the way, with Eleanor Levine and her absolutely great staff at the Center for Chinese Studies and the Institute of East Asian Studies to organize this grand reunion marking my supposed retirement. And to my very generous colleague, Margareta Lovell, for her contribution to this event from the J.D. McAvoy Fund. And I'm hoping that Jay isn't terribly upset by this going to a subject very different from his own interests. My warmest thanks to all of you for coming this afternoon. It's so great to see all 10,000 of you. I'm especially pleased by being here at the David Brower Center, since my husband, Charlie Drucker, was one of Dave Brower's boys back in the early days at Friends of the Earth. So this is a really wonderful thing. The whole event today is somewhat proleptical, however. As many of you know, I haven't been liberated quite yet, and plans for an extended beach vacation have had to be placed on temporary hold. Still, I have to say, proleptical is a word I've been dying to use for decades. So thank you all for the opportunity of providing me with the occasion to do so. I first heard it from Professor Peter Budberg, who was a very beloved mentor of mine. In fact, he was my very first mentor at Berkeley in the then Department of Oriental Languages. I met him during my very first week as a graduate student at Berkeley in 1969. And I learned from him that proleptical means the taking of something future as already done or existing. Hence my use of it today. Budberg used it to describe his long-standing project to unravel the evolution of archaic Chinese. This was a project that was continued subsequently by another recently departed Berkeley great, an illustrious advisor to so many of us, including myself. I was very privileged to work with David Keatley. I'm very happy to report that the future of Chinese art studies at Berkeley has the strong support of colleagues in the Department of History of Art, as well as in the group in Buddhist Studies, which joined in an effort to convince the administration to renew the position once I finally retire. Given the legacy of Chinese art studies begun at Berkeley by our sensei, James Cahill, and the major painting collection he and his family donated to the campus, how could Berkeley not support this study? We, in fact, have dual legacies at Berkeley, not just in Chinese art, but also in the art of South and Southeast Asia, coming through the lineage of Professor Emerita Joanna Williams, who continues to nurture students in these fields, as well as those of us intrigued in Central Asia. I was so happy when I first arrived at Berkeley to learn that she did her dissertation on that subject at Harvard. I'm very happy to see her here today. Moreover, Japanese art studies remains extremely strong at Berkeley in the expert hands of my colleague Greg Levine. And South Asian studies have been expanded with the appointments of two scholars, first Shugata Ray, and secondly Atreya Gupta, who is going to be starting to teach at Berkeley come fall. There is also the glorious opening this weekend, which has already been described, of the Center for Silk Road Studies, which is going to be housed at the Institute of East Asian Studies and chaired by Sanjot Mahendle, herself an archaeologist and art historian. This is going to, I think, add immeasurable weight to Berkeley's reputation in the study of Asian art and culture, and it will form an umbrella as well for the Mongolia Initiative headed by my former student, Ornat Sultan. So the study of China and its peripheral regions have always been central, I think, to our joined efforts here at Berkeley to steady the balance of art history in the department. And I call on you all today to help us find a way to institutionalize it. This is ever more pressing given the budget constraints the university faces, and believe me, I understand them after having been on the budget committee for 3 years, specifically in areas in the humanities. So I think we really need to do everything that we can to overcome the budget constraints that we face, and to face, I think, with a lot of creativity as well, the clear need to continue to build our students' empathy for and engagement with very diverse ways of thinking. Thank you. So having said this and having made this pitch, I'd like to thank my very good friend and very old friend, Marcia Hoefler, who has made the trek back to Berkeley also for this event from Kansas, for her very generous contribution to the Department of History of Art at Berkeley, specifically for graduate funding for students working on Chinese art. This kind of gift will make many more occasions like today's possible. So I'd like to thank Marcia very much for that. So now I'd like to turn to the notion of return, which is at the heart of this event and which brings us all together as a fellowship of like-minded people. The theme of return or reunion and reincorporation is really everywhere in Chinese art once you start looking. Just this past week, I was asked to talk at the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco about the famous return to Han China of Lady Wenji, who was ripped from her father's house by the Xiongnu in the year 194 or 195 and forced into marriage with a Xiongnu prince, with whom she eventually had 2 sons. She was ransomed 12 years later in 206 by the Han, only to face extremely mixed feelings about leaving her children behind. Like so many stories that have to do with Chinese contact with people beyond the borders, this one's filled with tremendous ambivalence and the sense that you really can't ever go home again, even if artists made it seem that this type of return was possible. I'm showing you the beginning and ending scenes from a long hand scroll that depicts the return of Lady Wenji, where the artist has made it seem as if you could rhyme somehow departure with return. A long series of male poets and writers from Liu Shangyin of the Tang dynasty to Guo Moruo in 1959 subsequently ventriloquized Wenji's emotional reactions to her kidnapping, her married life in the steppe, and her return to her then-deceased father's house. In their hands, she came to embody China and its often fraught relationship to the rest of the world. Small wonder that the theme was particularly popular during periods when China proper, and by that I mean the region south of the Great Wall, east of the Himalayas, and north of Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, and Burma, was threatened by invasion and contamination. I want actually to discuss 2 other paintings today that also take up the theme of return, with the goal in mind of mapping the continuity that exists, I think, between my own interests and those of many of my students in expanding the notion of China to consider the art of people who lived along its mostly ill-defined borders, but often came to rule it, and the very prolific research of my great mentor, James Cahill, who focused almost exclusively in his writing on the classical painting tradition. The 2 paintings both speak to a deep sense of historical awareness, though I think the first was deeply felt and the other was designed to seem so. How unlike our current president, who, as the commentator George Will recently wrote, lacks what T.S. Eliot called a sense not only of the pastness of the past, but of its presence. It has to be said that both the dispossessed leftover men of the Ming and the Manchu Qing dynasty who conquered them, no matter how compromised morally, were acutely aware of the past and its place in their present. So let me begin at the beginning with a painting that has been an endless object of fascination for a good number of art historians, several of whom are here today. One of the greatest was, of course, James Cahill, who wrote about this painting in his wonderful book, Compelling Image, and several of his students, including Rick Vinograd, Marcia Haufler, and Anne Berkes-Chassen. Also Chinese scholars such as Li Lan and Liao Yuanyu, as well as many others in China and the West. Given this lineage of commentators, I've approached this work with no small degree of trepidation. It's a painting that speaks directly to the meaning of human relationships, even those that vault over centuries. Chen Hongshou's Elegant Gathering, or the Yajitu, is an undated hand scroll that was probably done sometime after 1648, a couple of years after Chen, who you see here in a self-portrait that was done years earlier in 1635, sought refuge from the Manchu conquest of the Ming by briefly taking the robes of a Buddhist monk. It's thus one of his last surviving paintings. He died in 1652. And I'm very delighted to tell you that Julia White, the curator of Asian art at the Berkeley Art Museum Pacific Film Archive, has managed to secure the loan of this great hand scroll from the Shanghai Museum for an exhibition of Chen's work, Repentant Monk, Illusion and Disillusion in the Art of Chen Hongshou, set to open in October at BAMFA. And I thank Julia for providing images of the painting as well for the talk today. The reason for the deep interest in the painting's intriguing subject, which includes a series of 9 men and 1 bodhisattva seated on the back of a lion, is what I want to explore today. The men are each identified by inscriptions in gold ink. These inscriptions barely attract notice. They're extremely faint, but they do establish the fact that the figures were well-known historical individuals, all long dead at the time the painting was done. The bodhisattva and the lion are meant to speak for themselves, albeit ambiguously, and I think to a very limited audience. I will return to this duo shortly. The question is, why did Chun, painting near the very end of his life, undertake this project, and what was the painting meant to accomplish? Chun Hongshou's short opening inscription clearly establishes that he produced the elegant gathering for a man whose name is given as Chubing Daoren, which can be translated literally as the man of the way, Chubing. Now, in the late Ming period, the term Daoren was generally used to describe lay Buddhists rather than Taoists. So layman Chubing would be, I think, an accurate translation. Chubing was one of the nicknames of a man named Tao Xing, who belonged to a scholarly family living in the southerly region near Hangzhou and the West Lake. The nickname Chubing literally means escaping or expelling illness. But it's also likely that Tao borrowed it directly from the great Western Han barbarian quelling general Hua Chubing, who lived between 140 and 117 BCE. Hua Chubing was a nephew of the Empress Wei at the time, and at the tender age of 18, he battled successfully against the very Xiongnu who had abducted Cai Wenji, or would abduct Cai Wenji about 200 years later. And he did this on the behalf of the Emperor Wu. Ultimately, he wound up capturing a dozen Xiongnu princes and bringing them to the capital. The outcome, needless to say, was very different from what happened when the Manchus invaded Ming China. I suggest that both references to illness and to the general Hua Chubing are apt here, especially because the name Chubing is a partial pun on Chubing, which means expelling troops. Moreover, Chubing died in 1649, about a year after Chun finished the elegant gathering. He may well have been ill at the time that Chun did it, in other words. All 9 of the actors in the scene were likely long dead by the time Chun painted the Yajitu, or elegant gathering. Moreover, none of them was likely to have lived to witness the end of the Ming dynasty, which was conquered by the Manchu Qing in 1644, just about 4 years before the painting was done. And of those for whom we have dates, alas, none of them lived past the age of 66. Chun Hongshou himself was one of a younger generation of Yimin, or leftover subjects of the Ming, who never were reconciled to Manchu rule, and he was closely connected to Chubing's family through his Buddhist practice and their patronage of him. So all of the figures in the group were scholarly men with reformist tendencies and documented Buddhist affiliations. This we know from all of the wonderful writing that's been produced on this painting so far. Many of them were active in the revival of Chan Buddhism along the southeast Chinese coast in the last years of the Ming dynasty, but their Buddhist affiliations seem to have gone beyond that. The nature of their relationships to one another is what I think makes this painting so interesting. Tao Xing, also known as Chubing, seems to have asked Chun Hongshou to do the painting in commemoration of his grandfather, Tao Yomei, who appears here with a red circle around his head, leaning on a stone table just to the right of the Bodhisattva. Tao Yomei had died in 1622. 2 of his distant cousins, interspersed at regular intervals, are also part of the group, the brothers Tao Wangling and Tao Shiling. Both of these men were Pure Land Buddhists, followers of the eminent Pure Land master Zhuhong, and supporters of several Chan monasteries. Tao Shiling, the first figure we encounter on the right, is conspicuously divorced from the action taking place in the center of the painting, and his involvement with Zhuhong's group is much less substantially documented than his brother's. 2 other figures here, Huang Hui and Wang Zanhua, also received precepts from Zhuhong. 2 other figures, yes, 2 of the 3 very famous Yuan brothers, Yuan Zongdao and Yuan Hongdao, sit at the left, peering at the scene through a thick outcropping of trees, like a couple of ancient Luohan around whom a forest is grown. That's how long they've been meditating. The Yuan brothers were the instigators of the famous literati Gongan school, which stressed the importance of personal expression and experience in literature. They were also ardent Buddhists and followers of Zhuhong. So Huang Hui, Wang Zanhua, Tao Wangling, and his brother Tao Shiling were also close associates of the Yuan brothers, especially of Yuan Hongdao, who famously visited them in Hangzhou in 1595. I'm throwing all these names at you specifically to establish the fact that their relationships to one another were multiple. Moreover, Huang Hui, who was a Sichuan native, was the main patron of the monk who sits near the center of the painting, a man named Yu An. He was a resident of Beijing, and he was charged with the rebuilding of an important temple there. And he also made a celebrated trip to Westlake, where he met the Tao family. In other words, the figures shown in the painting were all well known to one another, as James Cahill and many others have established. Chinese painters often produced commemorative paintings of elegant gatherings. Some of them document actual convocations, and they're called same time, same place pictures. Here's one that dates to the year 1503. Our own on-the-spot photos of ourselves on tour fit into this category, though with the advent of Chinese artists like Zhang Hui, a very famous photographer, it's kind of hard to trust whether we're looking at an actual group or not. And in fact, none of these groups are actual. They were all assembled and placed in rows to illustrate what the staff of automobile manufacturing companies were like, or coal mining units, all part of this post-Cultural Revolution interest in workers. So there are also other groups that we've actually seen this one already. This is another same time, same place picture that dates specifically, I checked on my file, to April 6th, 2006, and it takes place at Wu Taishan, and it is, of course, the Stronach Travel Seminar, which we just celebrated the latest iteration of, by the way, this past Monday. So this idea that groups could, in other words, somehow memorialize people who actually met at a specific time in a specific place is not anything alien to Chinese art. As a result, there have been many attempts to pinpoint precisely what might have been behind Chen Hongshou's desire to present this group of late Ming scholars. In fact, everyone knows that late Ming scholars had a penchant for forming clubs. There were lots and lots of clubs during this period, all of them aimed at some sort of subversive organization that would somehow counter the sure demise of the Ming, which came in 1644, and past that would point to a new way to bring the Manchus to their feet. I suggest to all of us that this is a model that we might want to consider, also going forward. So Professor James Cahill thought that this group might have represented the so-called Grape Club, which met briefly at the monk Yu An's temple in Beijing, so we know he is in the picture. Others have suggested it was the so-called Fei Shi, or the Throwaway Society, founded by Tao Xing, also known as Chu Bing, and this was a society formed to resist the Manchus. Anne Berkus-Chassen ultimately rejects the historicity of the event, or the idea that it somehow portrays an established group, to argue that it's an idealized gathering of clearly identified men with similar Buddhist and political interests. Indeed, many paintings of elegant gatherings are idealized realizations of groups that were brought together mainly by letters, and this is the demonstrable case here. While members of the group were contemporaries and likely or definitely knew one another or more of the others, there is no evidence that they ever assembled at all for an elegant gathering, though, on the other hand, there's none that suggests that they didn't, even if some of them verifiably met in overlapping groups, both in Beijing at the monk Yuan's temple or at various temples around the Westlake in Hangzhou. Chen traces their correspondences in several different ways, and the notion of correspondence in both senses of the word, just to point out, is in play here, I think. He purposefully arranges his actors to figure a series of reciprocal relationships that are woven together into a tightly conceived fabric of friendship, and that is a friendship that's built on interests that were often shared in letters and notes written back and forth, much like all of us, in other words. Now, some of the group were joined by their civil service and in the late Ming capital, but most of them, I think we have to say, were really part of a group that grew out of something else, and that had to do with their interest in Pure Land Buddhism, and specifically as it was taught by the charismatic Pure Land master Zhu Hong. Zhu Hong was a master who very much supported the founding of release of life societies, and he also encouraged his followers to espouse vegetarianism. And this was so attractive to Buddhists during this period that many of them joined his group. They took precepts from him, even as they were busy promoting the revival of Chan temples along the southeast Chinese coast. As many have suggested, Zhu Hong's followers may have seen themselves as latter-day members of the White Lotus Society, and that might have been seen as a resurrection of a group that grew up initially around the Bodhisattva Manjushri, and saw him really as the embodiment of wisdom, which he certainly is, and as a resident of the northern region of Wu Taishan, which at the time, until the very end of the Ming Dynasty, was within control of the Ming, and only later passed into the hands of the Qing. So Manjushri really actually is a kind of a key to this whole problem of how to understand what's going on in Chen's painting. What we're looking at here is Dunhuang Cave 103, which dates to the Tang Dynasty, where we see the great debate between Vimalakirti and Manjushri acted out over a doorway. So with Vimalakirti on the right side and Manjushri, the Bodhisattva, on the other side. I will argue that this theme actually reverberates in the painting to a certain extent, but it's also masked in a serious way. And it's masked also, I think, to accommodate the fact that many of the men who were depicted in the painting were precept holders in the lineage of Zhu Hong. So here we return to the painting, and I wanted to show you just a list of people who, in the new work of Jennifer Eichmann, who's been working on Zhu Hong's fellowship, has created a list of people she's found distinct relationships, had distinct relationships to Zhu Hong, either took precepts from him or might have taken precepts from him or were very close to people who took precepts from him and who wrote letters to him. So we have this kind of epistolary relationship and a relationship of fellowship. So as you can see in this list, 6 of the 9 figures in the painting were either precept holders directly in the lineage of Zhu Hong or might have been. Also associated with Zhu Hong's circle are the remaining 3. So we have also, I think, in this group, very interestingly, a whole group of artists, including Chen Hongshou, who said that people founded vegetarian societies at a rate that was beyond belief, and release of life societies up and down the Chinese coast. So along with him, other famous artists who were part of this group were Dong Qichang, Fang Yizhi, and Zhang Dai. So this was not a group that I think was something not to set aside. It was extremely important. So thinking about Zhu Hong and his relationships, many scholars have suggested that Zhu Hong and their group of Pure Land followers saw themselves as a latter-day White Lotus Society, a resurrection of the group that gathered around the Song Dynasty literatus and painter Li Gonglin. Or simply that Tao Chubing may have felt that an allusion to the White Lotus Society gave his grandfather's friends a kind of special glamour to associate with this very important group of literati from many centuries past. There are several surviving Ming period copies of a painting that Li Gonglin purportedly did, and I'm showing you one of them right now, of his society. And you can see in the detail on the left, the members are joined by the Bodhisattva Manjushri riding on the back of his green lion. This composition reminds us that Li Gonglin's group was itself a reconstitution of a much earlier society, which the Pure Land monk Huiyuan founded in the 4th century at Mount Lu in southern China. There, Huiyuan would engage in debates on the Dharma, meaning something like phenomena or law. So somewhere in between the two. Yeah, it's hard to put a single definition on it. So I'm really so proud of you, Margareta, for searching around for that. These debates on the Dharma were intended to be restagings of the famous debate on non-duality between the layman Vimalakirti and the Bodhisattva Manjushri. Indeed, Chen Hongshou's painting also calls this debate to mind. But what it does is very interesting because it really rotates the direction of the composition so that it's not set up as a dual composition right-left, but where we see the interlocutor, Miwanzhong, perhaps taking the place of Vimalakirti, the layman, as he faces the Bodhisattva, who I think the artist is trying to trick us into thinking is Manjushri. So Mi Wanzhong's face is hidden from us, so we really can't glean a whole lot of information from him. However, I dare say that Mi Wanzhong was chosen for this task because he was likely the last one standing, the last of the group to pass away, which he did in 1628. He was also the one least closely linked to the group, though he did visit many of them in Hangzhou, and he knew lots of others from Beijing. And he was likely called in this instance by Chen Hongshou, who knew him also, along with Mi and Huang's own preceptor Yu An, when all the others were already ghosts, to lead them in a final ritual as a representative of the lost North. So this leaves us with a question, and I think it's an important one, of who the Bodhisattva, the object of the ritual, is. Following parallels to the White Lotus Society and the Vima Manjushri debate, we really, I think, want to say Manjushri, the Bodhisattva of wisdom. And several writers have, I think, very convincingly, including Professor Cahill. But looking more closely, we see this figure is cast as a woman. And she's a clear interloper who is somehow less substantial than the gathering of men, and thus not likely meant to be taken as a sculpture, which is another way she's been identified. Her form in this painting literally quivers. She strongly resembles another of Chen's renditions of the Bodhisattva Guanyin, which you see here on the right, where she appears as a portly woman whose floral ornament droops and whose face displays a sense of disappointment and defeat. Her companion, a bald monk, who is probably a Luohan, looks at her with concern. In the elegant gathering, however, the Bodhisattva is actually the lion-riding form of Guanyin known as Simhanada Avalokiteshvara, or Shirho Guanyin, the Guanyin of the lion's roar. Here she appears as a vaporous vision before the crowd of men. She's resplendent on her mount, who turns his head to gaze lovingly back at her. Now, the cult of Simhanada was built on Guanyin's, in this form, her visual similarity to Manjushri in his lion's roar form, the roar that marks the moment of enlightenment, and it flourished in the closing years of the Ming Dynasty. This is evidenced by a welter of large-scale wooden sculptures that were commissioned during this period, including this one that's now in the Metropolitan Museum in New York. Simhanada Avalokiteshvara, or Shirho Guanyin's particular function was to dispel illness, that is, to Chu Bing, Chen's patron's nickname, particularly disorders like cancer, leprosy, and other skin diseases caused by imbalance and excessive damp. Now, in Chinese medicine, of course, this equals an excess of yin, the female passive dark moist counterpart to the masculine yang, which is active light and dry. And why did the Ming fall? In a medical analogy, one could argue that it was because of an excess of yin. So here, Shirho Guanyin's efficacy is conceived as almost homeopathic. A final question about this painting begs for an answer, and that is why this substitution of Guanyin for Manjushri was made. Ani Pan has argued that the Northern Song Dynasty artist Li Gonglin and his circle of Buddhist friends may hold the solution, since it was they who actually pioneered the revolutionary notion of Guanyin as a legitimate alternative to Manjushri as a Kalyana Mitra, or spiritual guide. The Kalyana Mitra figure is a figure that's central to the Ganda Vyuha. That's the 39th chapter of the Massive Flower Ornament Sutra, or Avatamsaka Sutra in Chinese, the Huayan Jing, a scripture that remained important in the Chan lineage, even in the late Ming period. The Ganda Vyuha describes the young seeker Sudana's pilgrimage to see the future Buddha Maitreya in his lavish multi-story tower, to whom Sudana is led step by 52 guides. It takes a village, in other words, to get all the way to Maitreya. Manjushri is the second to the last of these guides. With Manjushri's northern home at Wu Taishan now lost to the Manchus, Guanyin alone had the status to stand in as a spiritual guide for Buddhists in the south. Her home on Putuoshan, the island off the coast of Hangzhou, was somewhat difficult to access, and it was later eyed with suspicion by the Qing Qianlong Emperor as a bastion under the control of Han monks. But it was still within reach. One could still take a ferry and get there. So her presence and Manjushri's absence makes a subtle political point here in Chen's painting about what was lost and what might still be safe 4 years or so after the Manchu conquest. And here I'm comparing this image of the Shirho Guanyin to the lion's roar form of Manjushri as we find it at Wu Taishan. And I want to use this as an introduction to the second painting up for discussion today, and that is the one that seems to have inspired this entire event. So turning away from Chen Hongshou with his own regrets and losses and his legerdemain with the figure of the lion's roar Guanyin, I want to take a look at the painting that inspired the organizers of this marathon event and with which my students are extremely familiar. So please, all of you, bear with me. This is a large-scale wallpaper painting, which was first shown to me by my very dear former colleague at the Asian Art Museum, Therese Bartholomew. The Qing Qianlong Emperor commissioned it in 1771 to celebrate the return of the Torgut Mongols to the Qing Empire from Russia. The emperor loved it so much that he subsequently had it pasted onto a screen before which he sat when greeting foreign visitors in the Grand Imperial Yurt at his summer retreat at Chengde, just over the Mongolian border. The painting is called the Wanfa Guiyi picture, named after the pavilion that forms its setting. The pavilion where 10,000 Dharmas return to, or perhaps as, one, which we can render as the pavilion of the reunion of all phenomena. The inspiration for the name comes from the famous Chan Gongan, or in Japanese koan, a riddling remark made by the Tang Dynasty Chan master Zhaozhou, who asked, if 10,000 Dharmas return as one, where does the one return? Qianlong must have known this koan because it was included in his father's own discourse record, and I dare say this is the source of the pavilion's name. I'm going to return to this as we finish up today. The painting was produced by two court artists, the Han Chinese painter Yao Wenhan and Ignaz Siegelpart, a Bohemian Jesuit. He had a Chinese name, too. Siegelpart was part of a group of European Jesuits led by the Italian Giuseppe Castiglione, who did much to create the Qing court's visual style. As we understand it, Yao did the portraits of the hundreds of assembled attendees, and Siegelpart did the architectural setting, adding a sense of on-the-spot reportage to the scene. The splendid apparitions in the sky where Buddhist devas descend on multicolored fungus-shaped clouds to mark the celebration may have required a third unknown artist trained in Tibetan-style Thangka painting. The artists depict the event from a position very high on a wall of the Da Hong Tai, the great red platform. This is a part of this complex, the so-called Putuo Zongcheng Miao, or Potala Temple at Chengde, the summer retreat of the Qing emperors, that allows a look down into it. It's based, obviously, on the Potala Palace in Lhasa, and it was meant to be an exact replica of it, though it conforms to very different terrain because the Potala in Lhasa is literally built on the top of very sharp mountain peaks. So the inside of it is actually mountain, whereas the terrain at Chengde is a little milder. So there had to be a little bit of stagecraft at play here. Hidden within this great red platform, in other words, is the Wanfa Guiyi Pavilion. And let me show you how it looks. So you can see it's a gallery around all four sides, and the building in the center, which you see over to the right in this photograph, is the pavilion itself. The 10,000 Dharmas return as one. The celebrations that took place there coincided most fortunately with the meeting between Qianlong, shown larger than everyone else to the right, and this painting. And let me show you him. So you can see specifically he's about 8 feet tall, maybe here. He was tall, but I don't think he was 8 feet tall. He's shown larger than everyone else, and there on the other side are the ruddy-faced Torgut Mongols led by their Khan, Ubashi, all of them dressed in their very best robes. Directly below this is a crowd of Buddhist monks, all dressed in Tibetan-style robes, and they've gathered to watch the puja that's in progress in the center, where the emperor's Buddhist master and imperial preceptor Rilpe Dorje sits to one side holding a vajra and bell, and you can see him here, which symbolize the great bliss union of wisdom and compassion, in other words, of Manjushri and Avalokiteshvara, these two bodhisattvas who symbolize these two powers. His neophyte counterpart, the Tibetan-born Ishidamba Nima, the brand-new 12-year-old third Jepsum Damba of Urga, faces him. Now, Ishidamba Nima had just been discovered as the incarnation of the previous Jepsum Damba in the royal family of Litang in eastern Tibet, and this caused no amount of consternation on the part of the Khalkha Mongols over whom he was going to preside, and he had just arrived in Inner Mongolia a few weeks earlier. The painting seems intentionally designed, I think, to mirror a mural that is in the Potala Palace in Lhasa, which depicts another diplomatically significant encounter, the one that took place between the great fifth Dalai Lama and the newly installed Qing Shringer Emperor, who was still a boy at the time. This happened in 1652 in the Forbidden City. And as you see here in this painting, the Forbidden City actually takes on the form of a mandala, with the emperor and the great Dalai Lama seated side by side as the two central figures in the mandala. So the question that we have to ask is what spurred this grand convocation between Chenlong and the Torgets. The story of the return of the Torgets is told in multiple histories, east and west. It was a convocation with international implications. The Torgets, traveling en masse, had just completed a daring escape from Russia. They traveled thousands of miles with their families and herds to seek refuge in the Qing Empire. The romantic sweep of the story captured imaginations across Eurasia, in no small part because it featured two of the most grandiose personalities of the age, the Qing Chenlong Emperor and Catherine the Great of Russia, who came to the throne in 1762. The Torgets had fled their original homeland in the western part of Mongolia, which I've circled here, under pressure from Chenlong's grandfather, the Kangxi Emperor. In the year 1770, they were living in a region around the Volga River in Russia. Their cavalry was regularly pressed into service by Catherine the Great, and they had, in fact, just finished a series of forays against the Ottoman rulers of Turkey, where they suffered really great losses. At that time, Catherine, prefiguring Vladimir Putin, had annexed, literally, he takes his claims back to this moment, annexed southern Ukraine and gained access to the Black Sea. The story was popular from the moment it happened and word came back to the West all the way through the 19th century, and no small measure because it was written up in a long article for the Edinburgh periodical Blackwell's Quarterly in 1834 by none other than Thomas de Quincey, he of Opium Eater fame. De Quincey, with his usual sense of drama and beautiful use of language, suggested that the Torgid ruler Ubashi was convinced to lead his people out of Russia to the Qing, not only to escape from the military servitude of Catherine the Great, but also on the advice of a scheming cousin who thought he was the rightful heir to the khanship. Now, the Torgets were Buddhists and supporters of the Dalai Lamas of Tibet, and they asked the Dalai Lama to divine the best day for their retreat from the Volga region. He announced that it would be January 5th, 1771. I don't know how he could have known this, but as a person of Slavic descent, I can tell you that that's the day before Epiphany, when all good Russians would have been home cooking. So it was really a good moment to do this. So at that time, also, the Dalai Lama assumed that the Volga River would be frozen, solid, which would allow the Torgets to cross over safely and quickly. Alas, when an estimated 150,000 to 400,000 Torget Mongols took flight in the dead of the night, along with approximately 6 million animals, the Volga was not frozen, or it was partially frozen, and many of them perished. Huge numbers fell through the ice and drowned, and on the long trek eastward, they were pursued by Cossack troops. Many more Torgets and herd animals died as well. So when Ubashi and his tribe arrived at Chengde 6 months later in July of 1771, the Torgets numbered only 85,000. Although this triumphant return home was terribly compromised by death and destruction that preceded it, Chenlong was ready with open arms, and I suppose this must have felt like being elected president while losing the popular vote. It's really best at this point to stick to alternative facts. So, as we've seen, the Potala Temple, which was in part an homage to the Torgets' regard for the Dalai Lamas, that had been designed as a copy of it. It already had a heavy symbolic overload, but the symbolic overload of the occasion didn't stop there, since the Dalai Lama's own Potala was merely understood as a materialized version of the home of the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, of whom the Dalai Lamas are emanations. So by the Qing dynasty, Avalokiteshvara, the gender-shifting Guanyin, had many homes, one of which was Putuo Island off the coast of Hangzhou. As Qianlong put it, there are many potolas, so why shouldn't this new one be as valid as all the others? In one sweeping gesture, the emperor naturalized Avalokiteshvara's residence as part of the Qing imperial camp at Chengde, gliding smoothly as ever over the layers of replication that stood between the bodhisattva and his new home. Qianlong may have been wanting to strengthen his alliance with the Dalai Lamas. I think that's probably the case. Or he may have worried about Guanyin's appeal to his Han Chinese subjects, something he couldn't really control. In any case, the Dalai and Panchen Lamas of Tibet had identified the Qing emperors as emanations of that other great bodhisattva, Manjushri, who dwells at Wu Taishan. And here again, we have him on his wonderful green lion. The 5 terrace mountains that were west of the Qing capital at Beijing. They argued as such that the Qing would unite all of Tibet, Mongolia, and China into a single Buddhist empire. Qianlong embraced the role of Manjushri with all the enthusiasm and subtlety that he could master. Here, in an initiation portrait of the emperor that was done sometime around 1745, which was when he took his first initiations into Tibetan-style Buddhist practice, he's shown in the robes of a lama, holding the chakra or wheel of the law. He's surrounded by groups of deities into whose practices he had been initiated by Ronpa Dorje, who we just saw recently. Above his head, in fact, is Ronpa Dorje, identified as his root lama. And on Qianlong's shoulders sit the attributes of Manjushri, the sword in the book, signaling his double role as a warrior and a scholar, active and passive, wrathful and peaceful. Qianlong's interest in Manjushri extended beyond merely identifying with him for political purposes. The emperor was keenly interested in one of the major scriptural sources on Manjushri, the Vimalakirti Nirdesha Sutra, which we looked at an example from Dunhuang, which describes the debate between the bodhisattva and the brilliant enlightened businessman layman Vimalakirti. As you probably know, Vimalakirti wins Manjushri's warm congratulations when, after days of discussing the nature of non-duality, Vima responds to Manjushri's long explanation by remaining silent. This eloquent non-action came to be known as the lion's roar because it demonstrated the uselessness of language in helping us to come to grips with non-duality. Here in a painting that the emperor kept at Chengde, his summer resort, we see the emperor, who loved switching roles to keep everyone amused or confused, taking the role of Vimalakirti against a Manjushri who's shown in the garb of an Indian prince. In other words, Qianlong was not just Vimalakirti, he was also, by birthright, Manjushri. He's everywhere. Manjushri was central to Qing sovereignty over the Mongols and eventually Tibet. The true form of this bodhisattva, with his roaring lion, first appeared in a vision to a Tang Dynasty sculptor who cast the first embodiment of this canonical image at Wu Taishan in the same lion's roar form that we, at first, think we see in Chen Hongshou's Elegant Gathering. In his lion's roar form, the bodhisattva is seated on his green lion. The original sculpture had many offspring. This is a subject that's been pursued with great vigor by Wenxing Zhou, and I thank her for continuing that work. Qianlong, who often took his preceptor, his court painter, Ding Guanpeng, to Wu Taishan, had him produce a large series of pictures of this sculpture, and subsequently sculptural copies of it were installed at new temples outside of Beijing and at Chengde at the Manjushri Image Temple, the Shuxiangsi, in 1780. This sculpted copy of Manjushri and his lion and the painting of the Return of the Torgets, known as the Return of 10,000 Dharmas to One, or the reunification of all phenomena, were put in place at Chengde well over a century after Chen Hongshou finished the Elegant Gathering for his friend and patron Xu Bing. And yet the two images are intertwined, I argue, if unconsciously so, insofar as both are commemorative. Moreover, in Chen Hongshou's painting, the image of a bodhisattva whose true identity is blurred has been subverted from the obvious in an effort to forge another kind of alliance that is built on a very different but also irreparable loss. We should also consider the issue of veracity from another angle. While the Elegant Gathering never actually happened, and there's no effort made by Chen Hongshou to suggest an inscription or otherwise that he is recording an event that he witnessed, that was okay from the perspective of the literati class. On the other hand, the 10,000 Dharmas purports to record a specific moment in time at a specific place, albeit one that had multiple locations, as we see. However, the 10,000 Dharmas that it is depicted as a happy reunion that was in fact fraught with sadness and contentiousness. Sadness over the death of as many as 300,000 Torgets in their eastward trek, and contentiousness over the discovery of Ishidambanima, a Tibetan, as the new Jepsum Damba of Urga, the preceptor for all of Outer Mongolia. In the end, Chenlung sent the Torgets back to the west to live near Ili in Xinjiang province, the new territories that he had finished conquering just a decade before, where they were made to farm instead of herd. They proved to be very poor farmers, unfortunately, and their numbers dwindled rapidly. There was, in other words, no happy return in the end, and only the spectacle of unity. Now, neither of these situations quite parallels our current reunion, or at least I hope not. And I know that tomorrow's symposium will leave us all the more reassured that the state of Chinese art history is stronger than ever. So as a parting shot, let me return to Master Zhao Zhou's riddle once again. The question is, that Zhao Zhou poses, if 10,000 Dharmas return to one, where does the one return? Now, the answer seems obvious, right? If the 10,000 Dharmas return to one, then the one must return to 10,000. And lo and behold, here you all are before me. So, unified. Answered this way, the riddle describes a contained cycle of coalescence and dispersal that leaves us assured that even if the ground of being is in flux, at least it's predictably so. However, I suspect that this facile response would probably have provoked a classic bat on the head from Master Zhao Zhou, so I think it's best to withdraw it and to suggest instead that we keep pondering this problem until we're all awakened. Otherwise, more practically, I hope we will return as one to Berkeley often in the decades to come to take it up again. So my warmest thanks to all of you for being here. I look forward to seeing you all again tomorrow. Thank you so much.
My name is Julia White. I'm the Senior Curator of Asian Art at the Berkeley Art Museum. And all of you here today already know, and many of you have benefited from Pat Berger's intensely exciting teaching technique, utilizing real works of art within museum collections. Her relationship to the Berkeley Art Museum goes back to her own studies at Berkeley, working under the direction of the late Professor James Cahill, where she learned connoisseurship and the importance of close observation of objects and paintings. Academic liaison for BAM PFA, Lynn Kimura, has observed that Pat holds the record among faculty members for the number of times she has brought classes into the museum for special sections, an astounding 52 times, which must be significant. And we're still counting, knowing Pat. Lynn has suggested that she be given the diamond, platinum, gold, frequent status for this record, meaning, I suppose, that she can fly in whatever seat she wants in the museum and will never be bumped. So on the screen, you can see one of Pat's recent talks and forays into the collection with a group of students. She and her students did an in-depth examination of the museum's painting of grapes by Guang, and they made some really wonderful discoveries about the painting and its history, which has enriched our understanding of the work tremendously. The students came in, looked at the material with Pat and our academic liaison. They made some interesting discoveries about the papers that were within the scroll box, and then Pat presented all this in a fabulous lecture that she gave at the Berkeley Art Museum last year. In addition to bringing students to see the collection, Pat has also been our absolute favorite and most popular speaker for special exhibitions of Asian art here at Berkeley. Having Pat on any program agenda related to Asian art means you'll have a lively, humorous, intelligent presentation, like we've just heard, that is guaranteed to both inform and entertain the audience. Equally impressive has been Pat's willingness to contribute writings for catalogs related to the collection. Her earliest published work for this in this vein was an essay on Lanying and the Zhejiang masters for the landmark exhibition, The Restless Landscape, Chinese Painting of the Late Ming, which was published in 1971. Most recently, she has contributed a brilliantly crafted essay, Living in the World of Regret, Chen Shou's Buddhist paintings, for our upcoming Chen Shou exhibition that Pat mentioned. In recognition of Pat's commitment to teaching, writing, and speaking at BAM PFA, several individuals have come forward with significant gifts of works of art to the collection, works which have been donated in her honor. I'd like to express my thanks on behalf of the museum for these generous gifts. First, from Therese and Bruce Bartholomew, a rare and important pen case with inkwell from Tibet. The Bartholomew gift is currently on view at the museum in Gallery 8, which is our Buddhist gallery. The show closes on Sunday, so I hope you'll get over to see it before it ends. It's an exhibition called Buddhist Art from the Roof of the World, a transmission of the Dharma, and Theresa's going to speak a little bit about her and Bruce's intention in giving the gift. Another important gift in Pat's honor that I'd like to recognize is from Frida and Christian Merck, who have given the museum a work of calligraphy by the contemporary Chinese activist artist Zhu Guang. This work will be featured in an upcoming exhibition that I'm organizing in collaboration with BAM PFA Director Larry Rinder, called To the Letter, regarding the written word, that opens on September 13th this year, and it will feature works from the collection of Asian and Western material that examines the written word. For just this weekend, I've installed this new edition, this new calligraphy piece, in the James Cahill Asian Art Study Center on the lower level of the museum. So you can stop by and take a look through the glass, and if I happen to be around or a staff member does, they'll let you in to see it. But let me first invite Therese to come and present her beautiful object.
Pat has many wonderful students, and I know that they were planning something a year ago, because one of them called me up and says, Therese, do you think you can raise money so that we can buy something in honor of Pat for the Berkeley Art Museum? So I said, yes. And then I thought about it. After 39 years raising money for the Asian Art Museum, this is too daunting. So I thought, well, thinking of the Chinese saying, 求人不如求己. Like, if you ask favor from other people, you might as well ask yourself, right? So I talked to my husband and said, well, we should give something to the museum in honor of Pat. So, well, what should we give? We called Julia right away and said, Julia, what do you suggest? And Julia said, well, it should be scholarly, an object associated with the written word, as in the transmission of Buddhism. So this would fit in nicely with the idea of a teacher in the transmission of Dharma, and would honor Pat Berger's legacy as a teacher, transmitting her knowledge to her students. So we thought about it, and we thought, hey, we do have a pen case. We should give the pen case to the museum, because the pen case once held a pen that would definitely be associated with the written word. So as you can see, the Tibetan pen is nothing. It's just a little sliver of bamboo cut to shape. But to the Tibetans, to be able to write a nice hand, like as in the scribe who can write in the Wuchen script, you have to put the pen in the beautiful pen case. It is a sign of knowledge. It's a status saying that you are a well-educated person. So the pen case, as you can see, consists of two sections. One part for holding the pen, and the other one for keeping the pen in place. And where the two parts join, two rings are soldered, so that you can thread a piece of leather thong or a piece of cord to tie it together and hang it on your body. These pen cases come in different shapes and sizes. It can be made of wood, made of copper, made of steel, made of iron, or gold and silver. And the most common one, of course, is metal, because it's sturdy and can protect the pen. But for high monks and high scholars, they prefer something that looking like this, gold and silver decoration. And it's all kinds of decorative technique that was used on these pens, such as engraving, open work, Damascene work, and chasing. This is the one we are giving in honor of Pat. It is silver with open work, and it shows a dragon among foliated scrolls. And the dragon, you can't see it here, have claws that are holding pearls. Now that is a Ming Dynasty motif that got transmitted into Tibet. The top part shows a phoenix and other animals. And in between the two, you see bands of copper, silver, and brass, just as a variation. So Bruce says, well, if you give a pen, pen case, you might as well give an ink pot. So we gave the one on the right, and there's a copper piece with silver on it. The Tibetan teapot ink pot is quite interesting because it is constructed in such a way that if you roll it around, the ink won't leak out. The ink is actually soot collected from burning pine branches and with a mixture of yak skin glue and water. And in some Tibetan teapots, you find two little metal pellets inside for rolling around, and so that the ink can be in a usable condition. Anyway, I hope you will see these two pieces before they disappear. Thank you.
So, Pat, Christian and I are delighted to give in your honor this scroll by a dissident artist, Guang. This is in recognition of your scholarship, which we so admire, and thanks for your many contributions to the field of Asian art. So, Guang CCTV Evening News stands in a distinguished group of artistic projects that manipulate Chinese calligraphy to raise questions of style and identity and legibility. And I want to show you two examples. This is the Guang piece. And to compare, this is Qiu Zhijie, who copied the Lanting preface 1,000 times on a single sheet of paper. The text that he copied, as you know, is this iconic Orchid Pavilion preface by Wang Shizhi, which is considered the most sublime piece of calligraphy and by the father of Chinese calligraphy. And the sheet of paper grew more and more illegible with multiple layers of ink, finally becoming a uniformly glossy black. And so he's raising the question of what does it mean to take this iconic master as your model when ballpoint pens and computers have replaced brush and ink. And another example is Zhang Huan's family tree, for which he used his face as a surface for calligraphy. Zhang specified names and slogans, political essays, and phrases from physiognomy, which three calligraphers then transcribed on his face. These were all parts of his personal identity, but the characters became illegible with the effect of obliterating his identity. Now, Guang is slightly older than these two artists. He was born in 1959 in the North China coal town Datong. He grew up during the chaos of the Cultural Revolution and therefore was heartened when in 1980 Deng Xiaoping announced that China would be opening up with a program called the Four Modernizations that would propel China into the modern world in the 21st century. That was 1980. Zhu was a 21-year-old fledgling artist. Fast forward 20 years to the new millennium, 2 decades into the modernization program, and the state-controlled media was proclaiming great success in science, technology, the economy, prosperity, social harmony. Zhu did not see it that way. He had become an art teacher, a husband, a father, but the lack of progress in social programs and the lack of tolerance for religion and for political debate left Ju and his friends profoundly disappointed. Now, Ju's gesture of resistance was to transcribe the 7 o'clock evening news, the official 30-minute encapsulation of the day's events, followed by, it followed a well-established pattern. First, there were reports on the activities of the Communist Party leadership. You remember this, I'm sure. The people whom they greeted, the meetings they attended, the places they visited, and then some examples of party unity. And then that took about 20 minutes. And then there followed some international news and glowing reports on social progress, such as, and other things like engineering feats, such as the Three Gorges hydroelectric dam. Now, on the evening of June 19th, 2001, Ju followed his custom of sitting down before the television and beginning at the upper left-hand corner, horizontally transcribing the news as fast as he could in legible, fairly legible, standard and running scripts. Some nights he used black ink, and some nights he mixed black with a color, and on June 19th he used red and blue. And after filling the sheet of paper, he resumed at the top, layering the script over the previous lines. Unlike Chojujie and Zhanghuan, Julian Guang didn't completely fill the sheet until it was a block, an opaque block. Rather, he continued on a second sheet, leaving tantalizing hints of the broadcast. Still, despite those glimmers of meaning, the transcription is fundamentally nonsense. The layered tangle is like so much static, and that's his point. The evening news for him was a mere distraction, a meaningless and irrelevant nonsense. So, Pat, one wonders, what would the Qianlong Emperor had done? How would he have managed the messaging? Had he had his own television network? Thank you.
So on behalf of the Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive, I'd like to thank both of you for these wonderful gifts, and I hope you'll all come to see them.